welcome to the strategic analysis for Grapple in the MCS November 2018 sitting. My name is Joseph Bowen and I have done the MCS case study for quite some number of years now. Today we're talking about the soft drinks industry, and it's very complex because there's two huge competitors, whereas our target company, our case study company, is a lot smaller but doing quite well for itself. So very, very interesting. They're a leading soft drinks manufacturer in Zedland, but are some way behind these large companies called Carnival and Party Pops, and as such they have aspirations of becoming a global leading manufacturer of soft drinks. So very interesting for us to analyze, and let's get straight to it. So the rational model centers around three key aspects: where we were, where we are now, and where we want to be moving forward. And that's where our mission objectives come in, and then the theories linking in with those missions and objectives are stakeholder mapping, the governance and ethics, and obviously the business environment itself, the five forces, growth strategies, pestle, the value chain, all that kind of thing. And now we're going to look at them one by one. So the first stage of analysis is to ensure we fully understand where the organization is heading. And that is implied with our mission, vision, objectives, and how we meet stakeholder demands and how we maintain our ethics, especially in this case where branding is ultra important. So the purpose of a mission is to essentially describe why does the organization exist, for whom and for what does it actually operate, and what does it want to achieve in the long term. The strategy then demonstrates or sets out a plan for how the organization will compete and operate towards these objectives. And the values and policies are the derivatives from that strategy, whereas they want to stand for, say, quality or value for money or innovation, or perhaps being budget, really, really low cost and friendly to every consumer. And policies are essentially what the employees in the company follow as defined by the strategy, purpose and values of the company. So how do we measure this? Well, the balanced scorecard, as you may be familiar from P2, is one of the best ways that CIMA recommends that a business are to measure these kinds of aspects. There's the financial perspective, such as profit and other financial ratios. We've got the internal perspective, which focuses on sort of the operations and employee utilization, the projects, the investment, and then learning, which centers around employees, having a skilled workforce, training them up, how much hours are spent on training, and the customer perspective, which, as you may expect, is about how many customers we have, how many complaints we have, how many products are sold, and customer satisfaction. So when we consider this, we also have to consider governance. And in this particular case, they're not listed. So it kind of goes out the window a tiny bit. So we need to think about it if Grapple are to list, but their existing situation with their board is relatively okay for a company that's not listed so far, and they'll have to make adjustments moving forward. So this is not going to be the primary focus of this analysis. So let's apply the governance despite the fact it's not the biggest deal in this particular case at present based on the pre-seen. It could actually become very important based on the unseen material. So they're unlisted, so they're not duty bound to have the governance regulations at present, and they usually dictate what kind of board makeup you have and what's appropriate in terms of the division of powers. The governance also has a divisional structure below the directors, where different regional aspects of Zedland are covered by different departments. There's no mention of remuneration, nomination or audit committees, but they are unlisted rather, so you'd expect there to be no information on this. Branding importance is, of course, pretty sort of paramount to this idea. The governance has to be there once they go public, and I assume they will go public at some point, because if you don't have a particularly ethical or regulation adhering governance structure, the brand itself will suffer because people will view it as perhaps an unethical or corrupt company. And you want to have positive reactions from stakeholders from that governance structure. So when we think about ethics and CSR, it's played a major part in most exam variants. And this is no different going forwards, as we can imagine. There's 21 people skills marks, which usually center on this topic. And this kind of aspect is really, really important for you to understand, because contrary to popular belief, the MCS is actually very theoretical. There are some numerical questions, but typically the brunt of your study is going to be, or at least your exam process, is going to be applying varieties of theories to the case material, not necessarily in a numerical sense, more so in what to recommend, why it's good, why it's bad, how they can be implemented, that kind of thing. So the key ethics and CSR issues from the case are reducing accidents, because they have a production line and there's typically going to be some accidents. CSR reporting, reducing the environmental footprint, such as with packaging, for example. Sustainable services, to ensure that they're purchasing crops and fruit and stuff that's actually going to be sustainably farmed and not over-farmed like we see in some markets. There are legal liabilities, of course, that they have to keep out for, which could crop up in the unseen material, and also the ethics versus profitability. That's quite crucial for this case in particular, because of how important branding is to the overall industry success. And finally, as you may expect, health and safety is a pretty key issue. Oh, apologies there. And the other issues that could come into it are professional ethics, and this is where CIMA want you to list their own ethical standards, so make sure you learn that. Also, bribery is sometimes thrown in very occasionally, because there's ultimately loads and loads of ways by which to present a bribery question to the student. They're just not that common. So don't spend too much time on bribery, but it could definitely come up, and it is a key ethical issue in pretty much every industry, because there's some way you could think of them being bribed in a way or another. So treatment of staff is pretty important, especially when we consider that automation was in the media coverage section, and it really pushed this idea that automation is the way forward, but it would mean that there will be redundancies. And treating staff in such a way, as in like ruthless redundancies, is not going to reflect well on the business. So we don't want to do that too hastily. We want to make sure it's measured, and to ensure that it is done appropriately and not loads of staff losing their jobs at the same time. It will have massive impacts on the motivations and feeling of other staff members, which then, if we think about the learning curve, whether it's implemented or not, the theory still goes that if you're demotivated and pretty low on morale, you're not going to work too hard. So efficiency does rely on staff being happy. Now, one of the biggest things in any industry is, of course, their critical success factors. It's the key things the organisation must do well to succeed. And when we apply it to this case, reliability to its customers is paramount. Of course, you might raise an eyebrow to that, because reliability makes you think it's like a product that is to be used. However, you have to remember the customers to Grapple are retailers. They want reliable supply of the drinks products that can weather any sort of demand spikes. If they have a big marketing campaign, one of the Grapple drinks is super popular for a period of months, then they want to make sure that they can stock it in, because retailers essentially have to stock what consumers want to make profit. Also, brand recognition is critical. As we mentioned already, branding is super important, and how you market and have these sort of advertisements with popular celebrities or sports stars is very important to ensure that drink sales actually happen for the company, because a lot of the time we purchase our drinks and food based on the branding around them. For example, Coca-Cola could have a number of scandals, and it would take a very large one for people to stop drinking Coca-Cola. That's because they've made their brand so strong over a period of 150 plus years, since the 1870s. So with that in mind, brand recognition is critical. And costs control is also very important. We know that they use an absorption costing model, and I want to highlight cost control here because there's an easy way for the examiner to ask you a question about the CSFs. Because something like Kaizen costing or maybe even standard costing could actually have a large impact on how certain budgets are worked out and applied to different question and the material involved. So with that in mind, please, given that there was like a whole page on budgeting and the costs, please be very, very prepared on costs. It's very important that you do so, because I imagine a number of variants will have this kind of issue crop up. Also, high quality is a CSF. Now, not necessarily in sense of premium. They're not aiming for the premium market, but they are looking to have a pretty high quality benchmark for a low price, a reasonable price. They're looking for that differentiation where they're not going super high end and they're not going for the mass produced style. They're going for that middle ground. So quality is still really, really important, because there's no point paying more for a drink that tastes exactly the same as a competitor's, which is, 50p less. So with that in mind, let's make sure that high quality is noted. And of course, customer trust, it relates to brand recognition, but it also applies the ethics. There's no point building a brand up and up and up with supreme marketing, only to then be not very ethical and some scandals come out and crush your brand recognition into the ground, lowering customer trust in that brand. So these are the key success factors for Grapple, and these are where we need to focus our attention to, because they relate to the strategy of the company, and that's ultimately what our job is, to monitor how our strategy is being implemented. We don't decide the strategy, that's for the strategic level, but we definitely monitor it and make sure that we offer our recommendations on how to fix, solve, or improve. So now let's move on to the stakeholder analysis section. Now, stakeholders are crucial, of course, to any business, especially when branding is super, super important. Stakeholders can make or break any industry, or business rather, because of how it can reap effects on ranging from production to just how many sales are going out, that kind of thing. Basically, all key metrics can be affected by poor stakeholder management. So let's go into it. The low power, if we look at Mendlers Matrix, there is the low power, low interest versus high power and high interest aspects. So when we think about low power, low interest, it's usually the employees of connected businesses or individual members of the public. However, when we scale this up to the high interest, low power, or moderate power maybe, is like consumer groups like Which. They're a big company that sort of protect consumer rights in a variety of industries. So let's go through it. The low power minimal interest aspects of this Mendlers Matrix are the employees of the suppliers, individual members of the public, and the suppliers themselves. They don't really have too much interest unless something's going wrong. So, like I said, in terms of reliability, as long as the company is reliable and consumers want the product, suppliers typically don't mind what's going on as long as it's not going wrong, essentially. If they have a good deal with you as a company and everything's going smoothly, they don't really have much of an interest other than the fact that you help them gain revenue. However, when we scale this up to low interest, high power, national governments are debatable. You could even put that maybe in high interest at the moment due to the sugar tax aspects of the current thinking around the industry, but also lenders and banks. So lenders and banks have the potential to give debt finance, and ultimately, you just want to keep them satisfied with your interest repayments and repaying on a timely schedule. In terms of high interest and low power, you're looking at smaller customers, so the small retailers, minor shareholders, employees, and environmentalists. You could also add Which, the consumer group, that kind of thing, into this kind of category. They have very high interest, not too much power, but they have enough power to cause an impact with a bad report or bad press, for example, especially when we consider the branding aspects of the business. And in terms of the key players, of course, the board and founders are especially important because they ultimately have the highest interest and the highest power in the individual business. Also, regulatory bodies closely tied to the national government, they themselves have an inherent interest in ensuring an industry operates within reason, such as sugar content in the carbonated soft drinks. And this is where we need to keep an eye on based on the media coverage section in the pre-scene. And as you might expect, large customers are especially important, so we have to keep them close as well. Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else a strategy do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene's on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.